This week, American Horror Story Cult talked about immigration, they talked about reality, they talked about fake news, and they also talked about bees. And yes, more clowns. So let's talk about it. American Horror Story Cult, Episode 2. Let's go. So we started off the episode right where we left off last week. Sarah Paulson woke up and saw a clown leaning over her bed. In this episode, she ran downstairs, talked to her wife, and her wife came up to defend her, except the clowns weren't there anymore. Just like what happened before with her. They had a big talk about it, and her wife really didn't know how much more she could take, which just shows you this relationship is reaching a breaking point. How it's gonna break, we don't know yet. But then we got to see Oz, the child. Their child woke up with a bad dream and saw Twisty in his bedroom. And yeah, Twisty came back to haunt people once again. And we saw one of the other clowns that was from the supermarket. We find out the clowns may or may not have been real because he wakes up from a bad dream and his mother's wake him up. Except he leans more towards Allison's character than Sarah, which is very interesting and comes into play a little later. We saw that Evan Peters' character twisted the attack on him that he provoked with Hispanic workers. The news and the media spun it to where these Hispanic workers attacked this man unprovoked, and they were basically apprehended by ICE, and they may or may not be deported. So it goes into the whole immigration status and illegal immigrant and ICE discussion that's been happening ever since Trump got elected. Evan Peters' character now is saying that he's going to run for city councilman after Chang was killed in the last episode, so he's going to run to take his spot. It's kind of interesting because a lot of what he said of taking people's fear and basically saying that we shouldn't be scared anymore, a lot of that came from, the poor man standing up for, the white middle class that has been unrepresented. Kind of came from Trump's campaign. So apparently Evan Peters' character saw Trump's campaign and decided to copy it to rise to power. Very scary. Very reflective of real life. We see new neighbors, including Billy Eichner, have moved in next door where the Changs used to live. It's really weird that they've just moved in so recently, and these two look very suspicious. Especially because there's these blue containers that are in his garage, and the man is dressed up in a hazmat suit. The babysitter comes over with a Twisty doll, which is wondering that years and years after Twisty and Freak Show have happened, if Twisty's kind of had this iconic status and horror in the world that American Horror Story has created. But the babysitter brings his Twisty doll and says not to tell his moms, and is basically playing the pinky game that she plays with Evan Peters' character with this kid. So they're holding pinkies and talking about what happened next door with the Changs and the clowns that came by in the truck. And she says a really, really interesting quote. People are going to believe what they're going to believe. Trick is finding out what they will believe and giving it to them. I think this is very prevalent to the last election. I think it was exploiting what people fear and using it to get their support and drawing them in with it. This whole season so far is wrapping around the fear idea and the word fear and what fears people actually have and what fears can we bring out of people. And that's really what Evan Peters' character is doing too. She also said, "Give me your fear, give it to me, it will make us both stronger." Which I think is really reflective too of Trump and how he was taking these people and taking their concerns and giving it to him and saying, if you give me your concerns, give me your support, it will make us both stronger in the end. So it's feeding off of people's fears and feeding off of, the problems they face and having somebody there to step in and try to solve those problems. Wow, this show is really, really accurate to the last election. It's kind of freaking me out. We go back over to visit the neighbors, and both Allison, Sarah Paulson, and their kid go over, and we have a whole family meet and greet with the new neighbors. We find out that the hazmat suit is actually a beekeeper suit, and the man is a beekeeper. And he has this whole discussion about the beehive and the bees, and he says all together they have a singular goal and there's no arguments. That's really reflective of the bees that were in the opening title, and also this whole cult aspect, and all joined together as one. They have a lot of pop culture references. I think my favorite was when the girl goes in and she's asking if they want Crystal Light lemonade, not lemonade, Crystal Light lemonade, and saying that she's addicted to lemonade after Beyonce. The pop culture references they make are just hilarious, and I think the Beyonce one was probably my favorite. And we also find out even weirder with this couple that the man is actually gay, and they made this pact that him and his wife, that once they turn 35, if they haven't married by then, they'd marry each other. There's a lot more stuff that happens with this couple, but it just keeps building and building to this weird situation. Allison's character doesn't find it weird, says they're eccentric, but Sarah Paulson, of course, is catching on like she's done with everything this season so far. So we're going to have to watch the couple and see what they do in later episodes. I think they're a little weird. Later on, we find out that night that the alarm tripped. Allison was going to go back in the restaurant to check, but their son was scared. So Sarah Paulson says, nope, I'll go do it. I'll go see what's wrong. She drives to the restaurant an hour away, finds out the alarm was tripped and shuts it off. However, she hears something in the meat locker. Earlier on in the episode, right after they showed the Hispanic workers getting arrested by ICE, there was a big discussion in the kitchen at Allison and Sarah's restaurant between this one man that's worked there for a while and also this other man, Pedro, who's very loyal to the staff there. And there was basically this man making these racist slurs towards Pedro and threatening him with a ladle, and you see Pedro pull up a knife to him, and you can see there's a lot of tension. Well, later on when Sarah goes in this meat locker, we find out the white man who was going after Pedro is hanging up dead in the meat locker. It was really interesting. It looks like the meat locker that was in Murder House and, you know, countless other American Horror Story seasons. They like their meat lockers. So Colton Hayes comes by as the chief of police and is talking to Sarah and Allison about the incident. Of course, they're targeting Pedro because of the tension between the two, and they also bring up Pedro's immigration status, even though we find out later that he was born and raised in San Diego. So again, the immigration status and the illegal immigrant, undocumented discussion was brought up again, and they're basically, the police are trying to frame Pedro. However, Allison's not having it, and so he's loyal to the restaurant and will not say he did it. But we will see a little bit from Pedro later on. Allison brings over the therapist again to talk to Sarah, and of course Sarah's not having it. In a one-on-one discussion, we find out that Sarah actually went across the street to the crazy neighbors, and they have a huge collection of guns. They have a really interesting discussion about Second Amendment rights and the right to carry a firearm, and the whole discussion we've had recently with the NRA and everything in the news. Billy Eichner's character tells Sarah it's the only thing that's going to make us feel safe again, guns. So it's that whole mentality of I have to protect myself, I have to save myself. Sarah also brings up the liberal snowflakes trope to her therapist, and she basically has a gun in her house now to protect her. Again, the gun will come in a little later. Later on, we see a scene that we saw in the preview from last week. We see Evan Peters coming by Sarah's house to basically campaign for city councilman. Sarah, of course, brings up the latte incident, which he denies and said that he spilled it and he was clumsy. But he's giving his whole spiel about he wants to get illegal immigrants out of the country, and he wants to make the neighborhood safer and da-da-da. And again, I'm like, you're running for city councilman. That's a strong platform. Of course, Sarah's not buying it. Evan Peters starts to play mind games with her and asks her about the security and the bars she put up and the knife, and really tries to scare and intimidate her and flips the script. A lot of the facts he brings up, he said he got from Facebook and not reliable sources, and it brings up the whole fake news reality and where these very much conservative, or as they call themselves conservative thinkers, are getting their information and the credibility of it. It talks about giving a chance to a humiliated man, which I think is a reference to Trump, and kind of saying, well, we gotta give him a chance. There was that whole conversation if Trump gets elected, give him a chance. You have to give him a chance, he's our president. So that was another interesting trope we brought up in this episode. There was a lot of focus on Trump's kind of campaign and his rise to power in this episode, which was fascinating. Evan Peters grabs the bars and he says, "Why do you need the knife? I thought you said you don't want to build a wall. Why do you need protection? Who are you hiding from?" He then says it's easy until they come for you, which was very important from the last episode and I thought was interesting. And now we're kind of seeing how, again, with the whole Obama presidency and everybody feeling safe, now with Trump in power, it's kind of flipped the script, and now the fear relies on, you know, a liberal community, liberal thinkers, and people like Sarah, same-sex relationship, fearing for what their future is going to be under Trump. It's really scary and kind of hits home in this episode. Easy until it's you. Allison talks to Pedro later and say it's scary right now to be brown, and they have that whole discussion, which I thought was really heartfelt. And I really like Pedro's character. I think a lot of the stuff in this episode was very on the nose, very direct, but I think the way they used Pedro's character to kind of bring some humanity to this topic of immigration, I liked it. I thought it was great. They framed Pedro as this good guy, this hard worker, and Allison called him, he's an American when they asked his immigration status. She said he's an American. It was really important storyline. It was very brief this episode, but I loved it. I loved the way they did that story. Later on, when Allison goes to work at the restaurant, the babysitter is not only manipulating Oz, but also manipulating Sarah Paulson's character. She has her have some red wine to relax and take a bath. She starts to be very forward towards her, and she said she won't tell her wife, and as soon as that happens, the power goes out. Security alarm starts blaring and everything goes dark, and we find out the entire county, that entire area is down. The neighbors start freaking Sarah out, the babysitter leaves, and we really think that she might be in on it somehow. And the way we really know, and I think I suspect she's in on it, is earlier she told Oz that he needs to go to sleep, and he was scared and says, "How do I know if I'm dreaming or if it's real?" And she said, "Just ask. Ask if I'm dreaming or is it real?" Later on, when this clown comes in, and the boy wakes up, Oz wakes up and says, "Is this real or is it a dream?" He says, "You're dreaming." And he goes back to sleep. Now those were lines that came from Winter, from the baby center. So I really am starting to think now that she is somehow involved in this, and it's also connected to Evan Peters. But we're not going to know for a while, of course, because this is an American Horror Story. Sarah starts freaking out. Allison is on a phone call, but her phone dies. So Allison gives a bunch of supplies to Pedro and asks Pedro to go home to check on Sarah. So Sarah's freaking out. She ends up grabbing Oz out of bed and gets the gun, and she starts to charge her way through the house and says they're going to make a break for it to the neighbors, because she sees the van outside and knows that somehow those clowns are coming for her. However, when she opens the door, she sees somebody and immediately shoots, and it's Pedro, and Pedro falls to the ground. It looked like Pedro was shot and killed. However, who knows, he might still be alive. It wasn't made clear. But now we're on episode 2, and this is the second huge murder in this neighborhood. And Sarah is obviously already unhinged, completely unhinged. So with the stakes so high in episode 2, I don't know how we're gonna go from here. I thought this episode had really great discussion about immigration and status in this country, and how ICE is kind of rounding up these people they're suspecting of being undocumented, and the unfair process of that. They had a really great discussion, and I think it was framed well by Pedro's story. The neighbors are really interesting. They are weird, but I think they're going to come more into play as a plot device from the, I guess you'd call it like the middle America, the white side of America, the oblivious side. You're starting to see some mistrust between the couple and some infidelity. And now with Sarah shooting Pedro, I don't know where this is going to leave her wife, and that's definitely going to affect the relationship. And now we have Evan Peters running for councilman. I don't know, everything is up in the air. The stakes are much higher than episode 1, and I'm curious to see what happens next week. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to see you next week for my review of episode 3 of American Horror Story Cult. And until then, I'm definitely not going to sleep tonight because they brought Twisty back. Why did they bring Twisty back? Why?